It's hurting our tourism industry. It's hurting our ability for small businesses to operate. So I figured what I'd do is start off with what we were able to get across the finish line last year, issues that I think that bill still has that we need to address going forward, possible issues that might come up dealing with liquor liability. And then I'm going to also talk about a couple other bills that we've passed in the last year or two that deal with small businesses and regulation and stuff like that. And so I think they're related to the topic of why we're here. It may not be exactly liquor liability, but it deals with the general feel of getting the government out of the way of small businesses. So I'm going to talk about all those. And then after I get done with this, like 10, 15 minutes, whatever questions you have, whatever issue you want to talk about, give it a shot. I'm happy to stand here as long as you want to go or until Scott tells me to leave. And I'm y'all's for the night. So you just tell me what you want to do after that point. So with that, so this issue arose about 5 years ago. It was the first time I remember hearing about it. So COVID, we started seeing rates rising, and a lot of restaurants in Greenville and Charleston were about the first ones that saw the issue. It's where the first noise was coming from. Nothing really big for the first year or two, and then we started seeing what's happening here, where places could no longer afford basic insurance they were required to have by law. And so the House passed a bill 3 years ago dealing with it, went nowhere in the Senate, came back next year, and tort reform became the topic of the session for last year. The Senate had agreed to talk about tort reform. Now, they wanted to talk about all tort reform. So they went down the road of cars, homes, medical malpractice, liquor liability, health insurance, statute of repose for construction. They went down the whole rabbit hole of every tort. And so the House, we wanted to focus on liquor liability because, A, that was the one that had the biggest impact on average people. It was the most acute one. And the typical rule I have in legislation is the bigger you make the piece of legislation, the harder it is to pass it because you're just adding enemies. You may be adding friends, but you're also adding enemies. And you shouldn't do that. And that's a structural one. And so let me give you some inside baseball of why that matters. In the House is the people's house. It's majority votes, 63 votes, you can pass anything you want. You got to get 63, but you can pass them. Senate, our state Senate is miles and miles more pro-filibuster than the United States Senate is. Let me give you an example. One senator can stop a bill. One senator can filibuster any bill in the state Senate, and it takes a 3/5 vote to override it. Okay? There are a number of senators who have never voted to override anyone ever, no matter what the issue is. And so getting our general rule in the House is we try not to do omnibus bills that deal with multiple subject matters because we know what typically happens. It goes to the Senate, enough people fight it, it dies. And so our goal all along was to focus on liquor liability because that was the acute problem that was affecting us. Now, this year, for example, our Constitution Subcommittee has actually passed a bill on medical malpractice. We're going to take that up on the floor this year. Our goal was to space them out. The Senate went all in. I wanted to pass this out. Y'all can pass this around, but it shows just how crazy the debate got last year on liquor liability. Donald Trump Jr. actually tweeted while the Senate was debating this bill, their version of this bill, during the bill telling, basically criticizing the Senate for even taking it up, wanting them to vote it down. His argument was this was a big insurance bill. Now, let's talk politics. I don't know how you can get the president's son to tweet about a bill in South Carolina, but someone did. And I don't know why he would care. But I wanted to show that because a lot of people didn't see that. That's inside baseball in the political world. But just to show you the amount of attention and money that was in this fight around tort reform, here's an example. The son of the president's tweeting about a bill in the South Carolina State Senate. Okay, just for scale. Senate ended up passing an omnibus bill. We sent them a liquor liability bill. They ended up agreeing to do the liquor liability bill along with some other changes. So let me tell you what the bill changed and then talk about what I think the bill lacks and where it needs to go further. So the first thing, and this first part is what I think is the most meaningful part when it comes to long-term savings for businesses in the insurance market, and that is the changes that we made to joint and several liability. So the legalese is now liquor, alcohol is no longer exempt from joint and several. You have to be willful, wanton, reckless, or intentional acts in order to be severally liable. Now, we give that in English, what that means for all of us who are non-lawyers. By the way, I'm not a lawyer, so full disclosure on that. Previously, when you had an alcohol exemption, if a bar and restaurant was even 1% at fault in an accident, they could be liable for the entire damage, even if they're 1% at fault. Let's give an example of what that means. Let's say someone came here one night, had a beer. They went to another bar, had 7 beers. Or they went home, had 5 beers. In a wreck, killed somebody. Tap room is liable because of how joint and several was written for the entire accident. And they can be sued for the entire part. This gets rid of that. Now, because alcohol and gross negligence is no longer in our exemption for joint and several, what this also does, it allows bars and restaurants to be under the same rules anybody else is when it comes to being jointly severally liable. It also added something for DUI that was important, and that was that if the person, the tortfeasor is what they're called, but we'll call them the defendant, the person who was driving drunk, if they were charged with DUI and you're going to court and you're getting sued over it, you're allowed to put that person on the jury for it. So here's what was happening. You get sued, they go to jury. The jury didn't know and never was allowed to be talked about the drunk driver. The only question in the case was, did you serve alcohol to the person that made the accident? It didn't matter if that person was driving drunk. It didn't matter what their part in the issue was, which is a huge problem. We allowed the DUI defendant, or the tortfeasor as the legalese word, to be on the jury instructions. What that will lead to is the jury now, when they're assigning guilt, they can assign a percentage of the guilt to the driver and not just the business, which is what they were doing previously. This is one reason why you saw a massive, in my opinion, spike in premiums for basically any business, even one that doesn't have a claim against it. Was because if you can be 1% liable and still have to pay the whole amount, everyone's really the same risk. There is not a safe risk. Because even if you're doing everything right, if you serve somebody one drink and they go and kill somebody, you're 1% at fault, basically, almost guaranteed. And so this became the issue. I think long term, that's the most important part of this bill that will actually lower losses on the insurance companies, which should lead to lower premiums. Secondly, it did a couple other things I want to highlight. It put in a knowingly standard. So it used to be a bar or restaurant who is serving, the way the law written is, you had to have, it just said that you were selling alcohol to someone who was intoxicated. Now it's knowingly. That knowingly standard will make it much easier for people who are sued to prove that, hey, I didn't know the guy went and did drugs. I didn't know the guy went home and drunk 4 things. I didn't know he had a thing of liquor in his pocket. I didn't know that. And it increases your odds of winning in court because you have to be proved that you knowingly served someone too much. Previously, that wasn't the standard. It raised that standard. Now, the other 2 pieces of it that I think get a lot more attention, but I don't think are actually going to be what leads to larger savings. I think the changes in joint and several are actually the biggest savings for people. The 2 things is the server training, and then secondly to that, the requirements around giving people the ability to buy down the liability they have to cover themselves with. So for example, let me give you a couple of examples. If you stop serving alcohol by midnight, you only have to have $750,000 of coverage. Every hour you close before that, you can lower it. If everybody has safe serve training, that's a requirement. Let me give you another example. Everybody must have at least 300 minimum, no matter what, 300,000 minimum. Every hour they close, $100,000 less. If you're a nonprofit, it's only $500,000 of coverage you have to have. If you use forensic digital identification system, you can reduce it by $100,000 in order to try to lower the amount you have to cover. The other thing that we did that became a complete disaster from the Department of Revenue was requiring safe serve trainings. And so this is something that a lot of restaurants and bars already do. They do it because they think they should do it. Some insurance companies actually, recommended or already gave some type of discounts in the we're requiring that everyone do that. Here's the issue. So we passed this bill in probably first week of June when it became law of last year. And the law said you had to have your stuff done by January 1 of this year. DUR had not actually approved anyone to do the training by the time we got to January. And so technically everybody who was here, who was serving alcohol now, was in violation of the law. They alerted us in December that they had not approved of anyone. They now have started doing it. We actually had to speed through a law to extend it. So initially DUR came out and said, we're just not going to enforce the law for a couple months to give some more time as we finally approve people to be safe serve trained. SLED, of course, came out